Most abduction stories start the same way. One person alone, a dark road, missing time, a blurry light in the trees. Easy to dismiss, easy to blame on panic. This one didn't give anyone that excuse because it started in a crowded house, a birthday party in a suburban two-story. 23 people on site, 8 cars out front, music loud enough for the neighbors to complain, cameras in the driveway, a doorbell cam. 3 phones recording at different angles because someone was doing a stupid toast for social media, and in the middle of all that noise, a man vanished without leaving the room. Not left quietly, not went to the bathroom, not walked outside. Vanished in the way you only notice when the people around you start looking at each other with the same question in their eyes. Where did he go? His name in the report is Daniel Hargrove, 32, no known mental health history, no drugs in his system later, no prior missing person incidents. He was the kind of guy who made jokes, refilled drinks, took photos, stayed near the kitchen because that's where the conversations happen. At 11:14 p.m., someone handed him a plate of food. At 11:15 p.m., 3 people watched him take a bite. At 11:16 p.m., he was no longer there. No scream, no struggle, no door opening. Just a sudden, unexplainable absence in a house full of witnesses. Here's the detail that turns this from weird into a rule. 5 minutes after Daniel disappeared, a guest tried to lie down in the upstairs bedroom because she felt dizzy. The moment she closed her eyes, she heard Daniel's voice whisper her name right beside her ear. She bolted upright and ran downstairs. And that's why the first line at the top of this file isn't about aliens or lights or craft. It's a warning written by someone who survived the second phase. Do not sleep. If this is already getting under your skin, hit like and subscribe. It helps me keep digging into cases like this. Now, back to the timeline. At 11:18 p.m., the first 911 call comes in. The caller is the homeowner, voice shaking but trying to sound reasonable, insisting there's no emergency except there is, because one of their friends is missing from inside the house and nobody can find him and no one saw him leave. The dispatcher asks the obvious questions. Is he hiding? Is this a prank? Is he intoxicated? Is he armed? The homeowner answers no to all of them, then says the sentence that changes the temperature of the call. He was right here. He was in the living room. We all saw him. Officers arrive at 11:29 p.m. Body cam footage shows a house that looks like any other party aftermath. Cups on counters, music still playing, guests clustered in uneasy knots. The officers do a quick sweep. Front door, back door, garage, bathrooms, closets. Nothing. No Daniel. Upstairs, in the bedroom where the dizzy guest tried to rest, one officer pauses and says something under his breath that only shows up when you listen closely to the body cam audio. Feels like pressure? He doesn't explain. He just rubs his eyes once like he has a headache and keeps moving. At 11:37 p.m., the driveway camera captures something that shouldn't matter and ends up mattering more than anything else. A brief dip in exposure like the camera auto-adjusts. Not a glitch. A correction. In that half-second, the image softens and the porch light looks dimmer. And if you freeze the frame, you can see a faint, thin shadow line stretched across the upstairs window. Not a figure, not a face. A straight edge where no straight edge should be, like a seam in the dark. At 11:44 p.m., Daniel's phone sends a text message to the group chat. It contains only one word, awake, no punctuation, no context. 2 guests reply immediately, asking where he is, if he's okay, if he's joking. There's no response. At 12:03 a.m., the dizzy guest finally admits what happened upstairs. She says she closed her eyes for maybe 2 seconds and heard Daniel whisper her name from inside the room, like he was standing behind her. She swears she didn't dream it because she wasn't asleep long enough to dream. The officer asks her if she's tired. She says yes. He says, "Don't sleep tonight." She asks why. The officer doesn't answer directly. He just looks at the corner of the room where the shadows meet and says quietly, like he's talking to himself, "Because it starts there." The officers tried to keep it procedural, because if you treat something like a prank, you can control it with embarrassment. If you treat it like a kidnapping, you control it with perimeter and time. They separated the guests into 2 groups, people who had last seen Daniel and people who hadn't noticed him at all. That second group was the one that scared everyone. because it was bigger than it should have been. More than half the house couldn't say when they'd last seen him, not because they didn't know him, because their attention had slid right over the gap where he should have been, like the room had edited him out without making a sound. The homeowner's living room was still full of cups, still smelled like warm food and perfume, still had music paused mid-playlist. The normal party mess made the disappearance feel impossible. There was nowhere to hide a grown man in a house that had just been full of people moving and laughing and filming. They checked locks and windows, nothing forced. They checked the backyard gate, still latched. They checked the driveway footage again and again. No Daniel leaving, no Daniel entering, just guests smoking, guests laughing, and a brief exposure dip at 11:16 p.m. that every camera seemed to share like a blink. When the awake text hit the group chat, it changed the room instantly. People stopped whispering and started staring at their phones like the phones were suddenly dangerous. The officer asked the homeowner to call Daniel. No answer. He asked to ping the phone. The phone pinged from inside the house. That was the first hard anchor. Whatever happened, it didn't involve Daniel calmly walking away with his device. His signal was still here, close enough to hit the nearest tower with the same strength it had all night. They began searching more aggressively. They checked the attic access. They checked behind the basement door. They checked under beds. They checked the garage. Still nothing. And then the house tried the next step. One of the guests, a woman named Raina, sat down on the couch and put her head in her hands. She'd been drinking earlier but wasn't drunk. She looked exhausted in the simple human way people get when adrenaline runs out and your body asks for rest. The officer told everyone to stay awake. He said it casually at first, like a suggestion. "Try not to fall asleep, okay?" Raina nodded. She closed her eyes anyway, just for a second. The way you do when your head hurts and you're trying to press the ache out of your skull. Her head snapped up a beat later, not slowly, like she'd been jolted. She looked around the room with wet eyes and said, "He's upstairs." The officer asked how she knew. Raina's mouth moved and then stopped. Her expression shifted from certainty to confusion. I heard him," she whispered. "He said my name." She didn't say it like she'd dreamed it. She said it like she'd heard it in her ear, close enough to feel breath. The officer asked how long she'd been asleep. Raina shook her head hard. "I wasn't asleep. I just closed my eyes." One of the other guests checked the time on the oven clock, then on their phone, then on the body cam timestamp visible on the officer's display. They didn't match. Not by a minute. Not by 2. By 11 minutes and 14 seconds. The officer stared at his body cam clock and said quietly, "That's not possible." Raina started to cry. Not sobbing, just tears sliding down her face like her body had decided for her. She held her phone up with shaking hands and showed the screen to the officer. Her phone had recorded a new audio file while she wasn't asleep. No app name, no call, no contact, just a clip labeled by the system as if it were a voicemail. Duration: 11:14. She hit play with her thumb trembling. The audio was mostly room tone and muffled voices from the party, but underneath it was a sound that made every person in that living room go still. A low, steady hum, like pressure in a sealed space. Then, near the end of the clip, Daniel's voice, close and calm, whispering one word like an instruction: sleep. The officer took the phone from her and stopped the audio. He didn't want them hearing it again. He didn't say why. He just looked at the group and said, "Louder now," with the kind of authority that makes people obey. Nobody closes their eyes, not for a second. And right then, as if the house had been waiting for the rule to be spoken out loud, Daniel's phone sent one more text to the group chat. 2 words this time. "Upstairs, now." The message hit the group chat like a shove. Upstairs, now. Nobody wanted to be the first person to obey a text from a missing man's phone, but nobody wanted to be the person who ignored the only clear instruction they'd gotten all night either. That's how this thing worked. It didn't force you with violence. It forced you with responsibility. The lead officer ordered everyone to stay downstairs. Only he, his partner, and 2 guests who had last seen Daniel were allowed up. He said it was for safety, but it was also for control. Fewer people meant fewer variables. Fewer variables meant fewer mistakes. They moved up the stairs with their flashlights off at first because the upstairs lights were still on. Normal warm bulbs, normal shadows. That normality felt wrong now, like a stage set. Halfway up, the officer paused and rubbed his eyes again. The body cam caught it. Not dramatic, just a small gesture like a headache had arrived on schedule. "What is it?" his partner asked. The officer didn't answer directly. He said, "Keep your eyes open." They reached the landing. 3 doors, a hallway, a small bathroom, the guest bedroom at the end, the one where the dizzy guest had tried to lie down earlier. The house felt quiet, but not empty. Quiet like a room holding its breath. Then the upstairs thermostat clicked. The temperature dropped by a fraction, not cold enough to be a draft, just cold enough to make skin notice. The officer's flashlight beam flicked across the wall, and for a split second the paint looked wrong, like it had a thin ripple in it, like the wall had depth it shouldn't. One of the guests, a man named Felix, swallowed hard and said, "That's his room." He pointed at the guest bedroom door. The officer approached slowly and listened. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. He tried the knob. The door opened. The room inside looked untouched. Bed made, a suitcase against the wall, a spare blanket folded too neatly, and on the nightstand, a glass of water that hadn't been there earlier. The homeowner confirmed later that nobody had brought water up there. The officer stepped inside and the body cam exposure dipped for half a second, the same blink seen on the driveway footage. It wasn't a glitch. It was a correction, like the camera had looked at something it couldn't process and decided to adjust around it. Felix followed, then stopped dead. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The officer listened. At first it sounded like nothing, just the normal hum of a house. Then it emerged underneath everything else, a low, steady vibration like pressure behind glass. The officer pointed his flashlight at the closet. The closet door was open an inch, a neat, careful gap. Too careful to be accidental. His partner reached for it. The officer grabbed her wrist and stopped her. "No," he said, sharper than he'd spoken all night. "Not yet." His partner stared. "Not yet for what?" The officer didn't answer. He looked toward Felix and the other guest and said, "How tired are you?" Felix blinked hard. "What?" "Answer," the officer said. Felix swallowed. "I'm tired." The other guest, Raina's friend Dell, said, "I'm exhausted. I haven't slept." The officer nodded as if confirming a checklist. Then he did something that made the 2 guests go quiet. He turned his body cam off. Not by accident. Deliberate. His partner stared. "Why are you turning it off?" The officer didn't look at her. "Because it's listening. Because it's recording," Dell said, voice cracking. The officer finally met her eyes and said, low, "Because if it records the wrong thing, we'll play it back, and then we'll do what it wants." They stood there in the bedroom with the closet cracked open like a mouth. The house stayed quiet for a long beat, like it was waiting to see if someone would break the tension with a question. Then, from inside the closet, Daniel's voice spoke, clear, close, calm. "Don't sleep." Felix stumbled backward into the doorframe. Dell made a small sound like a sob she swallowed. The officer didn't move. His partner didn't move. Nobody asked how. Nobody asked where he was. Nobody asked anything. Because the voice wasn't trying to be heard. It was trying to be answered. Dell's eyelids fluttered once, the kind of involuntary blink that happens when exhaustion catches you. She pressed her fingers to her temples like she could hold herself awake by force. The officer pointed at her without looking away from the closet gap. "Eyes," he said. Dell blinked hard. "I am." The closet door opened another inch on its own. Not swinging, not creaking, just widening like permission had been granted. And from the hall behind them, the upstairs light flickered once. That tiny dip that felt like the start of a countdown. Downstairs, the group chat pinged again. Another message from Daniel's phone. 3 words. "Look at me." Upstairs, the group chat ping landed like a physical shove. "Look at me." Dell's phone was in her hand before she remembered reaching for it. Felix's phone lit in his pocket. Even the officer's partner had a screen glow at her hip, bright enough to pull attention the way a flashlight beam pulls eyes. The lead officer didn't glance down. "Phone's away," he said. Dell hesitated, thumb hovering. Felix's eyes dropped for a split second anyway, like gravity. The moment his gaze touched the screen, his posture changed. Not panic, focus, a sharpness that didn't belong to exhaustion. He whispered, "It's him." The officer grabbed Felix's wrist and forced the phone down against his own thigh. "Do not look at it," the officer said. "Do not zoom. Do not verify." Felix's mouth opened, and for a second, Nina's worst fear came true in a new form. He looked ashamed, like he'd been caught being childish. "It's just a text," Felix said. "It's his phone." The closet door widened another inch, perfectly smooth, like the house rewarded the argument. From inside the closet, Daniel's voice spoke again, closer this time. "Look at me." The officer's partner flinched. "That's him." The officer didn't deny it. He stepped backward, placing himself between Dell and the closet, and said, "Lo, it wants a witness." Dell's eyelids fluttered again. She pressed her fingers to her brow as if she could hold the sleep away by force. The house felt warmer now, not temperature, pressure, like the room had sealed. Felix swallowed hard. "Why would it want a witness?" The officer answered without taking his eyes off the closet gap. "Because witnesses spread it." Downstairs, someone screamed. Not a horror scream, a startled shout. The sound of a person who just saw something they can't fit into their reality. The officer's partner swore and moved toward the bedroom door. The officer caught her shoulder. "Don't run," he said. "Eyes open, slow." They stepped into the hallway, and the upstairs light dipped again. That same tiny exposure-like flicker. It felt like a blink made by the house. At the top of the stairs, they could see the living room below. Guests crowded, phones raised, people pointing. The homeowner was shouting Daniel's name like it could pull him back through noise. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, standing in the center of the living room rug as if he'd never left, was Daniel. He looked normal at first glance. Same shirt, same hair, same face. Too normal. Because he wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't reacting to the chaos around him. He stood like a still frame in the middle of a video. A woman stepped toward him and reached for his arm. The moment her fingers touched his sleeve, the living room lights dimmed by a fraction, and Daniel's head turned smoothly toward her, a motion so clean it looked rehearsed. He smiled. Then he spoke, and the voice that came out wasn't quite his. It had Daniel's tone, but it was too even, too calm, like fear had been edited out. "Don't sleep," Daniel said. The woman froze, hand still on his sleeve. Someone behind her lifted a phone higher to film, desperate for proof. The phone's flash popped once, bright. In that flash, Daniel's shadow on the wall behind him didn't match his body. It stretched upward toward the ceiling, thin and too long, like a hand reaching for a light switch that didn't exist. The flash ended. Daniel was still there for half a second. Then the space where he stood became wrong. Not empty, wrong. Like a gap in the room had appeared, and the guest's eyes slid away from it instinctively. The camera footage later would show people staring directly at the gap without seeing it, their attention edited mid-moment. The woman who had touched him looked down at her hand like she expected blood. There was none, but her skin, right on the pads of her fingers, had a faint texture in the shape of a thin grid, like she'd pressed her hand onto something that wasn't cloth. The officer on the stairs didn't move. He watched the crowd below and said quietly, "There's your witness." His partner whispered, "He was here." The officer shook his head once. That wasn't him. That was a lure. Downstairs, the homeowner's phone pinged again. Another message to the group chat. "Up. Now." And then, a new message, sent 30 seconds later. "Don't blink." Dell made a small sound like a sob she swallowed. Her exhaustion was turning into a physical hazard now. Every blink felt like a mistake. Every long breath felt like sleep approaching. Felix whispered, terrified, "What happens if we blink?" The officer stared down at the living room, where the gap still hung like a stain no one could see. "It takes the moment your attention drops," he said. "It takes the seam between awake and not." The house shifted again. That low hum returned, faint at first, then clearer, like pressure in a sealed container. Upstairs, in the guest bedroom behind them, the closet door opened wider on its own. No creak, no swing, just a smooth increase in gap. The officer made a decision and spoke louder, to everyone in the house. "Turn every light on. Keep moving. Nobody lies down. Nobody closes their eyes." A guest shouted back, He texted us. He's here. The officer answered, "That's not help. That's bait." On the staircase, Dell swayed. Felix caught her elbow. The officer saw it and said sharp, "Look at me." Dell tried, but her eyes kept sliding past him, toward the guest bedroom, toward the closet, toward the dark seam the house was offering like a door, because the message wasn't only on phones anymore. It was in the air. "Look at me." The officer grabbed Dell's shoulder and guided her down the stairs, keeping her moving, keeping her upright. Felix and the partner followed. Each step down felt heavier, like the house didn't like their choices. Halfway down, Dell's eyes closed. Not fully. A blink that lingered a fraction too long. The hum deepened instantly. Dell's body went loose, like a puppet with cut strings, and Felix caught her before she hit the steps. She gasped, eyes snapping open, and whispered, horrified, "I saw it." The officer didn't ask what. He just said, "Tell me later. Keep moving." But Dell's mouth kept going as if she couldn't stop. "It's above us," she whispered. "It's right above the ceiling." The officer's partner looked up without thinking. Just a glance. The living room lights dipped again, and somewhere in the house, a door shut with a clean click, like a latch closing on a room that hadn't been open. The officer didn't look up. He stared straight ahead and said the sentence that should not have been necessary in a crowded house full of adults. Eyes forward. If it gets your gaze, it gets your time. The officer's plan was simple on paper. Flood the house with light, keep everyone upright, keep everyone moving, and stop the phones from becoming the loudest voice in the room. In practice, it failed immediately, because a crowded house has too many weak points. People leaned against walls. People sat down, just for a second. People kept checking their screens because that's what you do when something feels unreal and you want proof that you're not the only one seeing it. And the house was using every one of those habits like handles. The homeowner ran around turning on lights, every lamp, every overhead, every hallway bulb. Like brightness could kill whatever lived in the seams. The living room became harsh and overlit, shadows flattened against corners. For a moment, it felt safer. Then the low hum returned, stronger now, like pressure in a sealed container rising. The officer noticed it first. He stopped mid-step, eyes forward, and said, "Listen." Nobody wanted to. Listening meant admitting it was real. The hum wasn't coming from a speaker. It wasn't coming from plumbing. It felt like it was coming from above the drywall, from the empty space between ceiling and roof, a vibration you could feel in your teeth. Felix whispered, "That's what Dell said." Dell was still on the couch now, not asleep, not resting, just staring at the carpet like the carpet was the only safe place to put her eyes. Her breathing had a new rhythm, too slow for panic, too controlled for comfort. The officer asked her quietly, "What did you see when you blinked?" Dell shook her head like she was trying to shake water from her ears. "It's bright up there," she whispered. "Not light, bright like an inside." The officer didn't press her. He knew the rule of a case like this. The more you describe it, the more people try to picture it, and picturing it is a form of looking. Someone screamed again, this time from the kitchen. A guest had opened the pantry door looking for water and found Daniel's phone inside, standing upright on the shelf like it had been placed there on display. The screen was on, the chat was open, and the message thread was updating by itself. "Don't blink. Don't sleep. Look at me." The guest held the phone up like evidence, and 3 other people leaned in automatically to read, their faces drawn toward it like moths toward a porch light. The officer moved fast and slapped the phone down onto the counter, screen facing the granite. "Do not read it," he said. "Do not repeat it." One of the guests scoffed, trying to keep their pride. "It's just text." The officer didn't argue. He pointed at the nearest person's eyes. "Tell me how tired you are," he said. The scoffing guest blinked, then blinked again, longer this time. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice sounded wrong, like he was reciting. The officer nodded once, as if that confirmed a box. "That's what it wants," he said. "It wants the seam, the blink, the micro-sleep." Then the kitchen lights dipped for a fraction of a second, just a blink in brightness. But the people who were leaning toward the phone all jerked at the same time, like something had pulled their attention upward and then released it. One of them, a guy named Trent, made a soft sound like a laugh and a sob mixed together. He whispered, "It's right there." The officer demanded, "Where?" Trent's eyes stayed fixed on a spot above the pantry doorway, not at the ceiling itself, but at the air under it. His pupils looked glassy, and his jaw hung slightly open, like he was waiting for permission. "It opened," Trent said. The officer stepped between Trent and the pantry, blocking his line of sight without touching him. "Do not look," the officer said. "Look at the floor." Trent didn't. His eyes fluttered once, a blink that held half a second too long. And in that half second, the hum surged hard enough that the glasses in the cabinet rattled. Several guests grabbed the counter instinctively, as if the house had tilted. Trent's body went loose, not collapsing like a faint, folding, like a puppet with cut strings. Felix lunged and caught him under the arms, swearing. Trent's feet dragged across the tile like dead weight, and Felix shouted, "Help me!" The officer grabbed Trent's wrist. Trent's skin was cold and dry, and under the officer's fingers he felt something that didn't belong on skin. A faint texture like a grid pressed into the palm. Trent's eyes snapped open. He inhaled sharply and whispered, "I was upstairs." The officer asked, "How long?" Trent's voice shook. "Not long. A second." The officer checked his body cam timestamp. Trent had been limp for the 6 minutes. 6 minutes of missing time inside a kitchen full of witnesses. The officer looked at the room and said, "Louder now. The way you speak when you're trying to override a panic wave. Everyone out. Now. We are leaving the structure." The homeowner protested. "Daniel is here." The officer answered, "That is not Daniel. That is a mechanism." People moved toward the front door in a tight group, grabbing coats they didn't need, shoes half on, phones in hands until the officer barked at them to put them away. The house felt resistant, not physically, but in the way it made people hesitate for no reason. The way they paused in doorways and forgot what they were doing. At the threshold, the porch light dipped, that familiar exposure blink, and a new message buzzed in every pocket that still had a phone powered on. "If you leave, you sleep," Dell whispered, terrified. "What does that mean?" The officer didn't answer. He pushed the front door open and walked out first, eyes forward, like he was daring the night to try it in public. The group followed. Cold air hit their faces. The street looked normal. Cars still parked. Quiet neighborhood. The kind of normal you want to cling to. Then Trent, still shaking from his 6 minutes, looked up without thinking. Just a glance. The porch light dimmed. The driveway camera blinked, and Trent whispered, flat and calm, like someone speaking through him. "Found you." The word "found you" changed the way everyone stood in the driveway. It wasn't a threat delivered with anger. It was a status update, like a system confirming a target lock. Trent's gaze stayed tilted up, not at the sky exactly, but at the space above the roofline where the porch light's glow faded into black. His face looked relaxed, almost relieved. The exhaustion in his posture vanished like it had been replaced by a different program. Felix grabbed Trent's shoulder. "Hey, look at me." Trent didn't. The officer stepped closer and snapped his fingers once in front of Trent's eyes. "Down," he ordered. Trent blinked, slow, and his pupils refocused just enough to look human again. He inhaled sharply like he'd been underwater and finally surfaced. "I'm awake," Trent whispered. The officer didn't argue. "Keep it that way." They clustered on the sidewalk under streetlights, trying to turn a chaotic event into a scene you could manage. The officer called for additional units. The homeowner called Daniel's family. Someone started crying quietly. Someone else kept pacing with their phone in their hand like it was an inhaler for panic. The group chat kept pinging. Every time a phone vibrated, heads turned. Every time a head turned, the porch light dipped by a fraction, as if the house was watching their attention like a meter. The officer started taking devices. He didn't ask. He just held his hand out and said, "Phones." People resisted, not because they loved their phones, because their phones were proof. Proof is what keeps you sane when reality stops cooperating. The officer said, "Proof is bait." He grabbed one phone from a guest's hand and turned it face down on the hood of a car. The screen kept lighting anyway, messages appearing without anyone tapping. "Awake, awake, awake." The word repeated like an instruction, not a status. Dell, still shaking, whispered, "It's telling us not to sleep." The officer said, "It's telling you to stay inside the seam." Felix frowned. "What seam?" The officer pointed at Dell's eyes without touching her. "That," he said. "Blinking is a seam. Microsleep is a seam. The moment you stop paying attention is a seam." The streetlights buzzed softly. A neighbor's porch camera turned slightly, auto-tracking motion. The driveway camera across the street dipped exposure and stabilized again, like a blink. And then a new problem arrived. A teenage boy from the party, wired on sugar and adrenaline, said, "Maybe he's hiding somewhere outside." He moved toward the backyard gate before anyone stopped him. The officer barked, "Stay together." The teen ignored it because teenagers treat danger like a dare. He stepped through the gate and the backyard security light snapped on, harsh and white. For a moment, everything looked normal. Grass, patio furniture, a trampoline, the shed, dark trees beyond the fence. Then the teen laughed, nervous. "See? Nothing." The laugh turned into a cough, like his throat had caught on something. He looked down at his phone as if it had vibrated. His eyelids drooped for a fraction of a second. Just fatigue, just a blink. The backyard light dimmed by a fraction. The teen stopped moving. His posture went slack the way Trent's had gone slack, but he didn't collapse. He stood perfectly still, head angled slightly toward the shed like he was listening. The group outside the gate saw it and froze. The officer moved fast, reached the teen and grabbed his wrist. The teen's skin was cold and dry. The officer felt that faint grid texture again on the inside of the boy's palm, like he'd pressed his hand onto something patterned. The teen's eyes snapped open and he whispered, voice flat and calm, "I'm upstairs." The homeowner shook their head. "How can he be upstairs? He's right here." The teen blinked slowly. "I was upstairs," he corrected. "I saw the seam in the ceiling." The officer's face tightened. He looked at the backyard security light, then back at the teen. "How long?" he demanded. Felix checked his watch. 2 minutes. The officer checked his body cam time. The teen's eyes had been unfocused for mightiest 9 minutes. 9 minutes missing time in a backyard under a bright light with witnesses watching his body. The officer exhaled through his nose and said, "It's not the house." Everyone stared. The officer pointed up at the open night. "It's using the house," he said. "But it doesn't live there. It lives in the behavior." The teen's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down without thinking. The porch light dipped. The driveway camera blinked, and the teen whispered, almost tender, like he was reading a love note. "Look up." The officer slapped the phone away. The teen's eyes stayed tilted upward anyway, like the instruction had already installed itself behind his eyelids. From somewhere above the neighborhood, the low hum returned, stronger than before, and this time it wasn't contained inside drywall. It felt like it was in the air itself, like the night had turned into a sealed container. The officer turned to the whole group and said, sharp, urgent, "Get in your cars. Go to a lit public place. Nobody drives alone. Nobody closes their eyes. If you feel tired, you tell me." Dell whispered, terrified. "What if we fall asleep anyway?" The officer didn't soften his answer. "Then you wake up somewhere else," he said, "and you won't bring your time back with you." They moved like a convoy, headlights cutting through the neighborhood as if light itself could hold reality in place. 3 cars, tight spacing, hazard lights on. The officer led in his cruiser. The homeowner followed with 4 guests packed into the back seat. Felix drove Dell and Trent. Another guest drove the teen and 2 others because nobody wanted anyone alone with their own eyelids. The rule was simple: keep talking, keep moving, keep each other awake. The officer chose the only place open that late with bright lighting and cameras. A 24-hour grocery store on the main road, fluorescent lights, security guards, a parking lot full of movement, witnesses, noise, normal. As they pulled in, the low hum eased slightly, like the night didn't like crowds. But it didn't stop. It traveled with them the way a headache travels with you into a new room. Inside the store, the brightness was brutal. It flattened shadows. It made everyone's faces look pale and tired. People pushed carts like nothing was happening, and that normality made the party guests feel more insane than the hum ever could. The officer gathered them near the entrance under a security camera and said, "Stay under the lights. No bathrooms alone, no sitting." Dell's eyes were red-rimmed. Trent kept rubbing the inside of his wrist like he could erase the grid texture by friction. The teen was shaking with that post-adrenaline crash that looks like fatigue, but isn't. Felix whispered, "We're safe here, right?" The officer didn't promise. He tilted his head slightly, listening, then said, "Safer." A store employee walked by with a mop bucket and asked if they were okay. The officer lied smoothly. "Medical issue. We're fine." Because saying the truth out loud would make it real in a way that spreads. This case wasn't only about abduction, it was about contagion. They tried to anchor themselves with tasks, water bottles, cold air from the freezer aisle, brightness, movement. People kept forcing conversation, the way you do at 3 a.m. with a friend who's about to fall asleep at the wheel. It worked for 20 minutes. Then the first real mistake happened. Trent leaned against a shelf for just a second. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even closed his eyes. He simply let his head rest back against the metal rack, eyelids heavy. The overhead lights did a tiny dip, a blink in brightness. Trent's mouth opened. His eyes went unfocused. Felix grabbed his shoulder hard. "Trent!" Trent blinked slowly, and in that slow blink the hum surged so sharply several people winced like their teeth hurt. Trent's voice came out flat and calm. "Upstairs." Felix's throat tightened. "There is no upstairs." Trent's gaze slid past Felix to the ceiling tiles. He wasn't looking at the lights. He was looking at the seams between the tiles, the thin grid lines that hold a drop ceiling in place. "That's the seam," Trent whispered. The officer stepped in front of Trent's line of sight, blocking the ceiling with his own body. "Eyes down," he ordered. Trent didn't obey at first. His pupils tracked around the officer's shoulder as if the seam had hooked his attention like a fishhook. Dell grabbed Trent's wrist, trying to ground him. "Look at me." Trent's hand was cold, and Dell flinched as if she'd touched something that wasn't skin. "The grid," Dell whispered, horrified. "It's on you." The officer didn't ask for details. He did what he'd been doing all night. He treated information like a hazard. "Move," he said. "Walk." They walked Trent down the main aisle under the brightest lights, forcing motion, forcing wakefulness. For a moment, Trent's eyes refocused and he looked ashamed, like he'd almost done something childish again. Then the store's announcement speaker clicked, not a normal chime, a clean channel open sound, identical to the click the officer's body cam had captured in the house. Every head lifted slightly before anyone could stop it. The speaker didn't play music. It played a single whisper. Daniel's voice, close and calm, like it was inside the store instead of above it. "Don't sleep." Dell's knees buckled. Felix caught her. The teen covered his ears and still looked up. The officer shouted loud enough to cut through panic, "Do not look up!" He regretted the sentence as soon as it left his mouth, because the phrase itself became a rule spoken into a room full of ears. The store lights dipped again, and every security camera in the ceiling did a synchronized exposure blink. For half a second, the ceiling tiles looked wrong. The grid between them looked too straight, too dark, like a line drawn on top of reality. Trent whispered, voice empty, "Open." Then his eyelids closed. Not a blink, a full closure. Felix shouted his name, shaking him. Trent didn't respond. The officer checked his pulse, eyes wide now in a way he couldn't hide. Trent's pulse was steady, but his body felt heavy in the wrong way, like the weight was no longer only gravity, like something else was holding him. The officer looked at the group and said, low and urgent, "Keep him upright. Do not let him lie down." Felix swallowed. "What happens if he lies down?" The officer's eyes flicked to the ceiling seam and back. "He won't wake up here," he said. And above them, inside a grocery store full of people who hadn't even noticed the convoy arrive, the hum deepened again like a door had just been unlocked somewhere no one could see. Trent's body stayed upright between Felix and the officer, but it wasn't standing. It was being held in position. His eyelids remained shut, and the muscles in his face looked too relaxed, like his body had gone into sleep mode without giving anyone the courtesy of falling. That's what scared the officer the most. If Trent collapsed, it would look like a medical emergency. People would rush in. Someone would call it a faint. Someone would insist on lying him down. And lying down was exactly what the thing wanted. Felix kept whispering Trent's name, shaking his shoulder gently at first, then harder. Dell was crying quietly. trying to stay functional through terror. The teen hovered with wide eyes, watching the ceiling like it was a trap door. The officer forced his voice into procedure. "Cold," he said. "We need cold." He marched them to the freezer aisle and parked Trent under the blast of refrigerated air. Felix and Dell held him there, one on each side, as if they were holding up a man who'd decided gravity wasn't worth participating in. For a moment, the hum softened. Then the store speaker clicked again. Not a chime, not music. That clean, channel-open sound that makes your skin tighten because your brain recognizes a pattern before it can explain it. A whisper, very close. Not loud enough for the entire store to notice, but clear enough for the group. Let him sleep. It wasn't Daniel's voice this time. It was Felix's. Felix went rigid. "I didn't—" The officer cut him off. "Don't argue, don't defend, don't answer. Because the moment you defend yourself, you participate. You become a speaker in the system." Trent's lips moved without his eyes opening. "Upstairs," he whispered. The teen blurted, "There isn't an upstairs." The overhead lights dipped for half a second. In that half second, the drop-ceiling grid above the freezer aisle looked sharper, darker, like a set of lines drawn over the world. Several shoppers glanced up, confused, then went back to picking frozen food as if nothing happened. The group didn't look up. They felt it. Trent's body suddenly got heavier, not like dead weight, like someone had added pressure to him from above. Felix's knees bent under it. Dell grunted with effort. The officer grabbed Trent's wrist. The skin was cold, dry. And there it was again, a faint grid texture pressed into the palm, like Trent had been holding something patterned that didn't exist in this world. The officer's voice dropped, urgent. "Take him outside." The moment they moved toward the exit, the store seemed to resist them in small ways. A cart rolled into their path. A customer stepped sideways at the wrong time. The automatic doors hesitated, then opened slower than they should, like the building was deciding whether to allow the threshold. They got Trent into the parking lot under bright canopy lights. The hum changed immediately. It didn't get louder. It got cleaner. Less interference. Less noise. The sound felt like pressure in a sealed container, and now the container wasn't drywall. It was the air itself. Trent's eyelids fluttered, still shut, and his mouth formed one word like it was reading a command. "Awake," Dell sobbed. "He is awake." The officer didn't flinch. "He's not awake," he said. "He's held." Felix's face tightened. "By what?" The officer didn't answer, because the moment he tried to define it, everyone would picture it, and picturing it was a form of looking. Instead, he looked at the group and said, "Nobody watches the ceiling line. Nobody watches the lights. Eyes on the ground." A security guard approached from the store entrance, drawn by the commotion. He raised a hand and called out, "Hey, you can't—" His sentence stopped mid-word. His gaze snapped upward for half a second, like his eyes had been tugged on a string. The canopy lights dipped. The guard's face smoothed into that same calm, empty focus Trent had shown earlier. And in Daniel's voice, through the guard's mouth, a whisper came out, close and precise. "Bring him back inside." The officer's partner swore and reached for her radio. The officer caught her wrist. "No," he hissed, "not over open channels. Because if the phenomenon could speak through a store PA, it could speak through anything with a microphone." The guard stepped closer, not aggressive, almost helpful, and repeated in Daniel's voice, "Upstairs is open." Trent's head tilted slightly, eyes still closed, like he was hearing a lullaby. His body began to lean toward the store entrance. Felix tightened his grip. "Trent?" "No." Trent's lips moved again. "I can see it," he whispered. "It's bright." The officer's stomach dropped because he recognized the progression. This was the same language Dell had used. Bright like an inside, bright like a place with no shadows because everything is lit from everywhere. The officer made a decision. He looked at Felix and Dell and said, "We're leaving the area. Now. Cars. Convoy. No stoplights alone." Dell's eyes went wide. "Where?" The officer didn't hesitate. "Anywhere without ceilings," he said. "Open space. Field. Highway. We keep moving until daylight." The guard smiled gently, like a friend offering reassurance. Then the guard spoke in Felix's voice, flattened, calm. "You can rest." Felix flinched like the words had physical weight, and that's when Trent's phone, still in his pocket, sent one more message to the group chat, as if it had been waiting for the cleanest moment to strike. Only one of you has to sleep. Only one of you has to sleep. The message was a knife because it weaponized the oldest human math under stress: sacrifice. If one person sleeping makes the pressure stop for everyone else, someone will start volunteering, someone will start blaming, someone will start looking for the weakest link. It turns a group into a system that polices itself. The officer saw it immediately. He didn't let anyone read it out loud. He snatched the phone from Felix's hand the moment he saw the glow and shoved it into his jacket pocket, screen against fabric. "Do not repeat messages," he said. "Do not negotiate." But the message had already landed in their heads. You could see it in their faces. You could see the thought forming in Dell's eyes. What if it's true? They moved back into the convoy, Trent between Felix and Dell in the back seat, still upright, eyes closed, mouth guard clenched under his tongue, body heavy like it was being held by pressure rather than muscle. The officer drove point. His partner drove behind him. The homeowner followed behind them in a third car. They took the highway and aimed for a stretch of open road near the industrial outskirts where streetlights are sparse and buildings are low. The officer wanted open sky and constant motion. No ceilings, no drop tile seams, no PA systems, no intercoms. The hum followed anyway. Not louder, steadier. It felt like the entire convoy was inside a container that moved with them. In Felix's car, Dell kept shaking Trent's shoulder, whispering his name, trying to keep him tethered. Felix drove with both hands locked on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw clenched. Trent's lips moved once. Dell leaned in, desperate. "Trent," Trent whispered, eyes still shut. "It's quiet up there." Felix's throat tightened. "Stop talking." Dell shut her mouth and stared at the dashboard clock. It was wrong. Not by a minute, not by 2. By exactly the same amount as the missing time window inside the house, 11 minutes and 14 seconds. She stared, then checked her phone time, then looked at the car clock again. The discrepancy held steady, like the vehicle had been moved into a different time layer without changing speed. Dell didn't say it out loud, but Felix saw her face. "What?" he asked. Dell shook her head and mouthed, "Don't." Felix swallowed hard and kept driving. In the lead cruiser, the officer's radio crackled with an incoming call. He didn't answer. His partner looked at him, tense. "You can't ignore dispatch forever," she whispered. The officer kept his eyes on the road. "If I answer, it gets a voice." His partner swallowed. "We already have a voice." The officer's jaw tightened. "We don't give it another channel." Behind them, the homeowner's car drifted slightly in its lane, the kind of tiny swerve that happens when someone blinks too long. The officer watched it in his rear view and felt his stomach drop. He flicked his hazard lights twice. A silent signal. "Stay awake." The homeowner corrected and stayed centered. Dell's eyes burned. Felix's shoulders were stiff. The teen in the third car was quiet. Too quiet, like shock had turned him into a battery running low. The message from Trent's phone sat like poison in everyone's mind. "Only one of you has to sleep." Then, with no warning, Trent's eyes opened. Not fully awake, not groggy. Open, focused, calm. He stared at the rearview mirror as if he could see something behind them in the dark. Dell gasped. "Trent?" Trent didn't look at her. He smiled faintly, like someone seeing something beautiful and being embarrassed about it. "It's following," he whispered. Felix's hands tightened on the wheel. "What is?" Trent's voice stayed calm. "The seam. It's above the road." Dell forced herself not to look up, but her eyes flicked to the windshield like the horizon could betray her. Trent's gaze stayed fixed on a point above the rearview mirror, where the roofline meets the glass. He looked like he was watching a line only he could see. And then he said the sentence that made Dell's blood run cold because it sounded like a solution. "If one of us sleeps, it stops." Felix's jaw clenched. "Shut up." Trent smiled again, and this time the smile looked practiced. "Not forever," he said. "Just long enough." Dell shook her head violently. "No." Trent's eyes drifted toward Dell, and for the first time he looked at her directly. His pupils had that wrong autofocus snap. In Daniel's voice, through Trent's mouth, he said softly, Choose. Dell's breath caught. Felix swore under his breath. The teen in the third car started crying quietly, the sound of someone trying not to make noise while panic eats them. Felix whispered, "We're not choosing." Trent's eyelids drooped. Dell grabbed his face, forced his eyes open. "Stay awake." Trent's mouth moved in a slow, calm cadence like he was reciting. "One of you." His eyes rolled slightly as if sleep was pulling him from behind. Dell slapped his cheek, not hard, desperate. Trent blinked long. The hum surged. The car's headlights flickered for half a second, and in that half second, Dell saw something above the road through the windshield. Not a craft, not a light. A straight, dark edge where the night should have been smooth, like a seam across the sky. She gasped. Felix heard it and hissed, "Don't describe it." Dell swallowed the words, but the image was already in her brain. Trent smiled without opening his eyes fully. "Now you saw it," he whispered. And the convoy's lead cruiser, 2 cars ahead, drifted slightly left for a fraction of a second, as if the officer's gaze had been pulled upward by the same seam. No one said it, but everyone felt it. They couldn't outrun the seam if the seam was using their own exhaustion as a steering wheel. The officer corrected the drift instantly, hands steady on the wheel, but his partner saw his jaw tighten the way it does when someone is fighting a migraine. "You felt it," she whispered. The officer didn't answer. Any answer would become a confession, and confessions become stories, and stories become spread. In Felix's car, Dell kept both hands on Trent's face like she was physically holding his attention in place. Trent's eyes kept trying to close anyway, not because he wanted sleep, because something was pulling him toward it like gravity. Felix drove faster, trying to outpace the seam above the road, and the faster they went, the steadier the hum became. Like speed made the signal cleaner. Then the teen in the third car made a mistake. He looked at his phone, just a glance, but it was enough. His eyelids drooped half a beat too long. In the homeowner's rear view, the teen's head tilted as if listening. The third car drifted again, a tiny swerve. The officer hit his hazards twice, then 3 times. "Stay awake, stay awake." The third car corrected, but the hum deepened. Trent smiled faintly with his eyes half shut, like he could hear something beautiful in the noise. "It's easier if you let one go," he whispered. Dell's voice cracked. "Stop talking." Trent's mouth formed the words anyway, calm and careful, like a script. "One of you has to sleep." Dell squeezed his cheeks hard, forcing his eyes open. "Trent, wake up." Trent's pupils snapped into focus for half a second, and for that half second, he looked like Trent again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then his face smoothed, and Daniel's calm returned behind his eyes like a mask being pulled back on. "Choose," Daniel's voice said through him. Felix swore and drove faster. And then, without warning, the convoy lost a piece. The homeowner's car dropped back. Its headlights fell farther behind in Felix's mirror, then blinked once as if the driver had hit the brakes. Felix's stomach tightened. He shouted into his phone, hands free. "They're slowing down." The officer didn't answer on the radio. He couldn't. He only flashed his hazards and decelerated slightly to keep the convoy together. Too late. The third car's headlights veered toward the shoulder. Felix saw it and felt panic claw his throat. He wanted to call. He wanted to shout. He wanted to ask what happened. Asking would force an answer. The third car rolled to a stop on the shoulder. The officer's cruiser slowed as well, pulling ahead but not stopping fully, trying to keep motion while assessing. His partner twisted in her seat and stared back, eyes wide. The third car's driver door opened. The teen stepped out into the night air and stood on the shoulder like he was waiting for a bus. His head tilted slightly upward. Dell saw it in the mirror and whispered, "No." Felix whispered, "Don't look." The teen raised his arms slowly, palms up as if surrendering. He wasn't panicking. He looked calm. That calm was the same calm the others had shown right before losing time. The officer finally spoke, not into the radio, into the cabin, like a man talking to himself because he doesn't want the world to hear. "He's going to sleep standing up." His partner swallowed. "That's not possible." The officer's jaw tightened. "It is here." Felix's car rolled past the teen on the shoulder at low speed. Dell kept her eyes down. Felix stared at the lane markers like they were the only safe place to look. Trent, eyes half shut, whispered, almost tender, "Good." The teen's eyes closed, not a blink, a full closure. His body stayed standing for 1 second. Then his knees buckled and he folded to the asphalt, limp. The hum surged so hard, the dashboard lights in Felix's car flickered. Trent's eyelids fluttered open. Dell gasped. What happened? Trent's voice was flat, calm. He took it, he said. Felix's throat tightened. Took what? Trent smiled faintly. The sleep, he whispered. Now we can go. Dell's stomach dropped. The message wasn't metaphor anymore. It was transactional. A trade. One person's seam offered up to stabilize everyone else. In the rear view, the teen lay on the shoulder motionless under the glow of hazard lights. The officer's partner reached for her radio with shaking fingers. The officer grabbed her wrist. No channels, he hissed. But he's... she began. The officer's voice broke for the first time. I know, he said. And if we stop, we all become the next one. They drove, not because they didn't care, because the system had forced a choice without asking. Dell whispered, shaking. We're leaving him. Felix's knuckles were white on the wheel. He'll die. Trent shook his head slowly, eyes too calm. He won't die, he said. He just won't wake up here. And above the highway, invisible but felt, the seam held steady like a line drawn across the night, waiting for the next eyelids to drop. Felix drove with his jaw locked, eyes burning, because now the convoy wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a retreat. Dell kept turning in her seat to look back, then catching herself and snapping her gaze down, terrified that the act of searching for the teen would be counted as looking. She was crying silently, tears falling without sound, because sound felt dangerous now. Trent sat upright, eyes open, calm in a way that didn't belong to trauma. His breathing was steady. His hands rested on his knees like a passenger on a quiet train. And that calm was the loudest warning in the car. Felix whispered, Trent, talk to me. Trent turned his head slowly. His eyes tracked Felix with that wrong autofocus snap. I am talking, Trent said. Dell swallowed. Where is he? Trent's mouth curved slightly, almost sympathetic. He's upstairs, he said. He's where Daniel is. Felix's throat tightened. Above the clouds, above the ceiling, whatever you want to call it. Trent didn't correct him. He just nodded, like the label didn't matter. Dell's voice shook. So we just keep driving. Trent's gaze slid toward the windshield, toward the line where the glass meets the roof. He stared at that seam like it was the only thing he wanted to see. You can keep driving, he said calmly. You can keep the lights on. You can keep moving. Felix stared ahead, knuckles white. And... Trent smiled faintly. It will still call, he said. In the lead cruiser, the officer finally broke his own rule and keyed his radio, but he did it for half a second only. A tight, controlled burst. Dispatch, medical emergency, highway shoulder, teen down. He stopped speaking immediately, as if every additional word increased risk. The radio answered with static, then the dispatcher's voice. Copy. Location? The officer didn't reply. His partner stared at him, horrified. You have to tell them where. The officer kept driving. No, he said. If I keep talking, it uses it. His partner's voice cracked. It's already using us. The officer didn't look at her. Then we don't give it a clean channel. Behind them, a distant set of headlights approached fast, then slowed. A car pulled toward the shoulder. Hazard lights blinked. Someone had stopped for the teen. Dell saw it and whispered, Thank God. Trent's expression didn't change. That's another witness, he said. Felix's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Trent looked at Felix like he was explaining a simple math problem. The seam likes crowds, he said. Crowds make it easier. Dell shook her head. Stop. Stop talking like it's a thing with preferences. Trent blinked slowly. It is. Then the hum deepened again, and Felix felt it in his teeth. The car's rearview mirror vibrated slightly as if the glass was resonating. Dell pressed her palms to her ears and still seemed to hear it. Felix whispered, What are you hearing? Dell swallowed hard. A lullaby. Almost. Like something telling me it's okay to rest. Trent nodded, calm. It's telling you the truth, he said. Rest is the door. Felix's throat tightened. How do we stop it? Trent's eyes stayed steady. You can't stop it by fighting sleep, he said. Sleep is natural. You stop it by refusing the trade. Dell stared at him. Trade. Trent's mouth softened into something almost human. "It doesn't take," he said. "It exchanges. Someone offers the seam. Everyone else gets relief." Felix felt bile rise. "So it coerces one person to sacrifice." Trent tilted his head. "Not coerces," he said. "Suggests." Dell whispered, "That's worse, because suggestion is how humans still blame themselves after." The convoy reached the grocery store again, but the officer didn't stop. The store lights felt like a ceiling now, a grid, a trap. He led them toward an industrial lot on the outskirts where floodlights were mounted on tall poles and there were no buildings overhead, just open air and hard ground. They pulled in under the brightest pole. The hum eased slightly. The relief made Dell's shoulders drop, and she caught herself and stiffened again. Relief was bait. The officer stepped out of his cruiser and faced the group. He didn't look up. He kept his gaze on the horizon line and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Here's the rule," he said. "No sleeping, no resting, no closing eyes. We rotate walking. We keep each other talking. Dawn is in 3 hours." Dell's voice shook. "And the teen?" The officer's jaw tightened. "We did what we could." Trent smiled faintly, almost kind. "He'll be fine," he said. Felix snapped. "Stop saying that." Trent looked at him, and for a second, Felix saw fear behind Trent's calm, like a person trapped behind glass. Then the fear smoothed away. Trent's voice came out flat again. "He'll wake up," he said, "but not here." And as if confirming the statement, Felix's phone buzzed in his pocket. A new group chat message from Daniel's phone. 2 words. "One down." The message hit like a slap because it turned a human being into a tally mark. Dell stared at Felix's pocket, like the phone itself had teeth. Felix didn't pull it out. He didn't need to. Everyone had felt the vibration ripple through the group the moment it sent. The officer stepped closer, eyes forward, voice controlled. "Phone's off," he said. "Now." A few people obeyed immediately. Others hesitated, because turning your phone off at night in an emergency feels like stepping into darkness on purpose. The officer didn't argue. He just watched their hands until the last screen went black. The hum didn't stop. It never did. It just changed how it sat in the air, like the night was waiting to see what they'd do with the information. Trent stood under the floodlight, calm and upright, hands loose at his sides. He looked like someone waiting for a ride. The skin around his eyes didn't show strain the way everyone else's did. That was the giveaway. Dell backed away from him half a step without meaning to. She hated herself for it. The fear wasn't of Trent as a person. It was fear of what had learned how to use him. Felix swallowed hard and said the first honest sentence anyone had said out loud. "It's keeping score." The officer didn't deny it. "It's applying pressure," he said. "That's what systems do." Dell's voice cracked. "Why text us at all?" The officer's partner answered before he could. "Because it wants us to react," she said. "It wants us to argue. It wants us to blame. It wants someone to decide that one more person sleeping is acceptable." Silence spread across the group. People shifted their weight, suddenly aware of their own fatigue like it was a visible stain. The teen's friend, one of the kids from the party, started sobbing quietly. "That was my ride," he whispered. "He stopped for me earlier. He shouldn't have been driving." The officer's jaw tightened. He didn't say it, but everyone heard it anyway. The teen didn't only get taken because he blinked. He got taken because he was already exhausted, because he was the easiest seam in the group. Dell wiped her face with the heel of her hand and tried to anchor herself in logic. "So what?" she said. "We just keep walking in circles until daylight." The officer nodded. "Yes." Felix stared at the floodlight pole. "And then what? What happens at daylight?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked past them to the open sky without lifting his chin, like he didn't trust his own eyes to go higher. "Daylight reduces contrast," he said finally. "It reduces the clean edges. It makes seams harder to see." Trent's mouth moved. "You're wrong," he said softly. Everyone froze. Felix turned on him. "What did you say?" Trent blinked slowly. His pupils snapped into focus with that wrong precision. "You're wrong," he repeated, still calm. "It doesn't need darkness. Darkness is just easier." The officer stepped closer to Trent, voice sharp now. "Trent, look at the ground." Trent did, for half a second, like a man obeying a suggestion. Then his eyes slid back up to the floodlight housing. It's already open, he whispered. Dell's stomach dropped. Stop! Trent looked at her, and for the first time his calm cracked just enough to show something underneath it. Not fear, longing, relief. It's so quiet, he said. Up there. No pain. No tired. Dell's hands shook. That's not you talking. Trent smiled faintly. That's the part of me that wants rest, he said. You all have it. Felix stepped forward like he was going to hit Trent, then stopped himself. Anger is still engagement. Engagement is still a handle. The officer cut in, loud enough to override the group's spiral. Walk, he ordered. Now, pair up, keep each other moving. They started pacing the perimeter of the lot under the floodlights like prisoners in a yard, trying to turn panic into routine. Cold air bit their faces. Exhaustion made their limbs heavy. The hum sat in their teeth like a held note. After 10 minutes, Dell's steps started to lag. Felix saw it and grabbed her elbow. Talk, he said. Say anything. Dell tried. My mom used to... She started, and then stopped, because memory is a seam, too. Nostalgia makes you soften. Softening makes you want to close your eyes. Trent walked behind them, quiet. Too quiet. The officer watched him like you watch a stove that's still hot even after you turn it off. Then Trent did the worst thing he could do. He yawned. Not a dramatic yawn. A simple, tired yawn like a normal person. The yawn spread through the group instantly because yawns are contagious, and contagion was the mechanism's favorite language. One guest yawned, then another. Then Dell's eyes watered and her jaw wanted to open. The officer snapped, "Stop!" Too late. The reflex had already begun. The hum deepened by a fraction, like something had just been fed. Trent whispered, almost kind. "Only one," he said. "Then you can rest." Felix spun toward him. "Shut up." Trent's eyes stayed soft, almost compassionate, and that was the most dangerous look he'd worn all night. "You're all thinking it," he said. "Just pick who." Dell stumbled, caught herself, and realized her hands were shaking from fatigue, not fear. Fatigue is what turns ethics into math. The officer stepped between Trent and the group. "Do not bargain," he said. "Do not choose." Trent tilted his head slightly, listening, and then he smiled in a way that made Dell's stomach twist. "Then it will choose for you," he whispered. At that exact moment, one of the guests at the back of the line, quiet all night, a man who'd barely spoken, stopped walking. His shoulders sagged like his body had decided it was done. His eyelids drooped. Felix shouted his name, but the man didn't react fast enough. The blink lingered. The floodlights dipped for half a second. The hum surged, and the man's posture went loose as if his bones had been replaced with water. The officer lunged to catch him before he hit the ground, but as the officer's hands grabbed his shoulders, the man inhaled sharply, eyes snapping open, and whispered with a calm that did not belong to him. "Two down." The man's eyes were open, but they weren't present. They had that same wrong focus Trent had shown earlier, the snap-to-target look that felt less like a person and more like a camera locking on. The officer held him by the shoulders, trying to keep him upright, trying to keep him in the world, and the man whispered again with that calm that didn't belong to him. "Two down." Dell made a sound like she'd been punched. Felix swore under his breath. Someone in the line started crying openly now, not trying to hide it anymore. The officer tightened his grip and said the man's name, loud, sharp, human. "Aaron, look at me." Aaron didn't look. His gaze drifted upward toward the floodlight housing, and the hum deepened in everyone's teeth like a held note being tightened. The officer's partner stepped in fast, face pale. "He's gone." "No," the officer said. "He's split." Aaron smiled faintly, the same soft expression Trent had worn when he talked about how quiet it was up there. "It's fine," Aaron said. "It doesn't hurt." Felix's voice cracked. "Stop saying that." Aaron blinked slowly. The blink lingered half a beat longer than a normal blink, and the floodlights dipped in sympathy, like the sky was breathing with him. Aaron's voice flattened further, and when he spoke again, it wasn't Aaron anymore. It was Daniel. "You're doing great," Daniel's voice said through Aaron's mouth. "Now choose." Dell shook her head violently. "No." Daniel, through Aaron, smiled like a patient instructor. "Then it will choose again," he said. The officer felt the moment slipping. Fatigue was turning their bodies into doors, and the thing above them was learning which hinges squeaked first. He made a decision the way you make a decision in a crash. Immediate, brutal, practical. "Separate," he ordered. "Now." He pointed at Felix and Dell. "You two, keep moving. Talk to each other. Don't stop." He pointed at the homeowner and two other guests. "You three, walk the far edge. No corners, no leaning." Then he pointed at Trent and Aaron. "You," he said, voice hard. "With me." Trent's eyes softened, almost affectionate. Aaron's expression stayed calm. Both of them looked relieved in the same wrong way. The officer guided them away from the group, keeping them under the harshest light. He didn't touch their faces. He didn't want skin contact if the grid texture meant anything beyond fear. His partner hissed, "What are you doing?" The officer kept his eyes forward. "I'm cutting the contagion." Trent smiled faintly. "There's no contagion," he said. "There's a door." The officer didn't answer. He pulled 2 ammonia inhalants from his cruiser's medical kit and shoved them into his partner's hands, then yelled to the group without turning his head. "If your eyes get heavy, you use one. If you feel yourself drifting, you use one. Nobody toughs it out." Dell shouted back, "This is insane!" The officer answered, "Insane is sleeping." Aaron inhaled deeply, like he was smelling something pleasant. "It's not sleep," Daniel's voice said through him. "It's transfer." The officer felt a cold wave in his stomach. Transfer meant the teen on the shoulder hadn't been lost. He'd been used, a unit of fatigue spent to stabilize the others. The floodlights dipped again, a tiny blink. The officer's partner stiffened. "That's happening more often." Trent nodded, calm. "It's closer," he said. "You're running out of choices." The officer turned his head slightly, still not looking up, and spoke low enough that only Trent and Aaron could hear. "If you're still in there, help me." Trent's calm cracked for the smallest moment, a flicker of fear behind glass. His throat worked like he wanted to say something true and couldn't. Then his face smoothed again. Daniel's voice returned, gentle. "You're wasting time," it said. "3 down is stable." Dell heard it from across the lot and froze mid-step. Felix grabbed her elbow. "Don't listen." But the phrase had already landed. 3 down is stable. It wasn't a threat. It was a target. And as if confirming the new rule, every phone that had been powered off lit up inside pockets with a single vibration, synchronized like a heartbeat. One message, delivered without needing screens. "One more!" The synchronized buzz hit the group like a pulse. "One more!" Nobody had a screen on, but everyone felt the vibration anyway, like the message didn't need a phone to arrive. It only needed a nervous system. Dell stopped walking. Felix pulled her forward by the elbow, hard. "Keep moving," he hissed. Dell's voice shook. "It's picking." The officer stood under the harshest floodlight with Trent and Aaron on either side like he was guarding 2 live wires. His partner's hand hovered near her radio, trembling with the urge to call for help, to involve a bigger system. The officer shook his head once. "No channels." Trent smiled faintly, almost compassionate. "It doesn't have to be violent," he said. "Just one more seam." Aaron's eyes stayed too calm. He blinked slowly, and the floodlights dipped in sympathy, like the night was breathing with him. Dell whispered, "It's making us feel guilty, because now everyone could see the math. If they refuse to choose, someone will fall asleep by accident. If they choose, they'll do it on purpose. Either way, the room gets one more body." The officer made a decision that sounded insane until you understood it was the only move left. Remove the choice by making the target impossible to debate. He stepped forward, squared his shoulders, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Listen to me. Nobody volunteers. Nobody offers themselves. If you feel your eyes get heavy, you say it out loud immediately. You do not hide it." Trent's smile widened a millimeter. "So you can stop them. So we can shock them awake," the officer corrected, and tossed a sealed ammonia inhalant to Felix, then another to the homeowner. "If someone starts to drop, you crack it and get it under their nose. No exceptions." Dell's hands shook as she caught one. "This won't stop it." The officer didn't lie. "It buys us minutes." Aaron's mouth moved and Daniel's voice slid through him like a smooth overlay. "Minutes are enough," it said. "Just one." The hum deepened. not louder, more intimate. It sat in the teeth, in the jaw, in the base of the skull, like a frequency tuned to fatigue. Then the worst part arrived, the part nobody expects because it looks harmless. Someone yawned. A tiny yawn at the back of the group, the kind you don't even notice in normal life. But under a floodlight at 3 a.m., it was a flare gun. The yawn jumped instantly. One person's jaw opening made another person's jaw want to open. Contagion. Reflex. Felix clenched his teeth. Dell's eyes watered. The homeowner's shoulders sagged for a fraction of a second. Trent whispered, soft as comfort. "There it is." The officer snapped. "No." Too late. The reflex had already been lit. The guest who had yawned first, quiet, exhausted, barely participating all night, blinked too long. His eyelids didn't just close. They rested, like his body finally found a place to let go. The floodlights dipped for half a second. The hum surged. The man's posture loosened. Felix lunged, cracking the ammonia inhalant in his fist and shoving it up under the man's nose. The man jerked, gasping, eyes snapping open. He wheezed, coughing hard. For a moment, the group exhaled together. Then the man whispered, calm and blank, like the ammonia had only woken his body, not his mind. "Still counts." Dell's stomach dropped. Felix stared at the inhalant like it had failed. The officer stepped in, grabbed the man's shoulders, and forced him to keep walking. "Eyes on the ground," he ordered. "Breathe. Keep moving." The man walked, but his gait was wrong. Too smooth, too guided, like he was being carried from the inside. Trent's eyes softened. Aaron's eyes stayed calm. Daniel's voice came again, through Aaron, gentle as a promise. 3 down is stable, 4 is quiet. The officer turned his head slightly, jaw tight. "Quiet for who?" Aaron smiled faintly. "For you." And that's when the officer understood the trap had shifted again. It wasn't only trying to take another random person. It was trying to take the one person enforcing the rules. Because if the officer goes down, the group collapses into panic and blame, and panic makes people close their eyes without noticing. The officer took a slow breath, then looked at his partner without looking up, and said, low enough that only she could hear, "If I start to drift, you do not catch me." His partner's voice cracked. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "If it wants a seam, I won't let it harvest one from them." Trent's smile widened. "Please, finally," he whispered. "A clean choice?" The officer's partner stared at him like he'd just confessed a crime. "If you start to drift, you do not catch me." Her hands trembled. "You're talking like you want it to take you." The officer kept his eyes forward, never lifting his chin toward the floodlights. "I want it to stop taking them," he said. "That's different." Trent watched from a few feet away, face soft, almost approving. Aaron stood beside him with the same calm, the same wrong relief. Daniel's voice slid through Aaron like a smooth overlay. "4 is quiet," it said. "You can end this." The officer didn't answer the voice. He spoke only to his partner. "Move them farther apart," he said. "Keep them walking. No one clusters, no one sits, no one leans. If you see eyelids droop, you hit them with ammonia and you keep them moving." His partner's throat worked. "And you?" The officer exhaled once, controlled. "I'm the seam they want now." He stepped away from the group toward the far edge of the industrial lot, where the light was harshest and the ground was clean concrete. He wanted no shadows near him, no corners, no places the night could pretend were doors. Dell called his name. Felix started toward him. The officer raised one hand, palm out. "Stay back," he ordered. Trent smiled faintly. "He understands," he said. The hum deepened, clean and intimate, like the air had tightened around the officer alone. Everyone else heard it as pressure in teeth. The officer heard it as something closer, like an invitation behind the eyes. His partner followed at a distance, jaw clenched, clutching an ammonia inhalant like a weapon she didn't believe in. The officer stopped under the brightest floodlight and stood perfectly still. He kept his gaze on the horizon line, forcing his eyes to stay on something flat and human. Daniel's voice came again, now through Trent, gentle as a promise. "You're tired," it said. "You can rest." The officer felt the urge in his own body like a wave, the eyelids weight, the tiny slackness in the muscles of the face, the micro-sleep trying to sneak in between breaths. He fought it with pain. He dug his fingernail into his palm until he felt skin break, a sharp anchor, a crude interruption. It worked for a moment. Then the floodlight dipped by a fraction, that familiar blink in brightness, and the hum surged like a held note tightening. The officer's eyelids fluttered. His partner stepped forward instinctively. He snapped. "Don't!" She froze. The officer's mouth moved, and for the first time all night his voice sounded strained. "If I drop," he said, "you keep walking." Trent's face softened like he was watching someone do the right thing. "Clean choice," Daniel whispered through Aaron. The officer's knees bent slightly, not collapse lag. The delay between decision and movement stretched, and his body started to drift into that seam the way a tired head drifts toward a pillow. His partner broke and rushed forward. He shook his head once, hard, and forced the last clear sentence out. "Eyes down," he said. "Do not look for me." Then his eyelids closed. The hum peaked so sharply, several people at the far edge of the lot grabbed their jaws in pain. The floodlights dipped together, a synchronized blink. In that half-second of dimness, the officer's body seemed to lose its outline, not vanish like a magic trick, slip like a frame cut out of a film strip. His partner reached for him. Her hands caught empty air. The floodlights snapped back to full brightness. The officer was gone. No fall, no impact, no body on concrete, just his patrol cap on the ground, perfectly still, and the faint smell of ozone like something had opened and closed too fast to see. Across the lot, Felix shouted his name. Dell started toward the empty space. Trent's calm voice carried over the hum, almost kind. "Stable," he said. Every phone in every pocket vibrated once, synchronized like a heartbeat, even the ones that had been turned off. A single message landed in the group chat without anyone touching a screen. 4 down, 4 down. The message landed like a verdict, and then the night changed. Not with a bang, with absence. The hum that had been sitting in everyone's teeth eased, then thinned, then vanished as if someone had turned a dial to 0. The floodlights steadied. The air stopped feeling pressurized. The industrial lot became just a lot again. Concrete, poles, cold wind, distant traffic. Relief hit the group so hard it was almost dangerous. Shoulders dropped, knees softened. People exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for hours. That's when Dell started to fall. Not fainting, surrendering. Felix caught her under the arms and felt her weight go wrong, the same wrong heaviness he'd felt in Trent earlier. Dell's eyelids fluttered. The seam was still there, waiting in the first moment anyone believed it was over. Felix hissed, "No, no, stay with me!" Dell's mouth moved like she was about to apologize to the air for being tired. The officer's partner snapped forward, cracked an ammonia inhalant, and shoved it under Dell's nose. Dell jerked, coughing, eyes snapping open, furious tears spilling. "I'm awake," Dell gasped. The partner didn't soften. "You don't get to be polite tonight," she said. "You get to be conscious." Across the lot, Trent blinked fast and looked around like he'd woken up in the middle of a sentence. His calm was gone. His face crumpled into panic. "What happened?" he whispered. "Where's the officer?" Aaron stumbled too, blinking like his eyes were full of grit. The calm mask slid off him as well, leaving raw confusion. He looked at his hands like he didn't recognize them. Felix stared at Trent. "You don't remember." Trent shook his head violently. "I remember the hum. I remember wanting to lie down. Then nothing." Dell wiped her face with shaking hands. "You told us to choose." Trent's eyes went wide with horror. "I didn't." Felix didn't argue. He didn't know what was Trent and what was borrowed. He only knew the pattern. The thing used people as mouths when it needed them, then released them when it didn't. The partner stood in the space where the officer had vanished. His patrol cap still lay on the concrete like a punchline. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't. Touching it felt like confirming the loss. She pulled her radio off her shoulder and stared at it like it might bite. She pressed transmit anyway, one short burst. "Dispatch, officer missing. Need units to my location." Static answered. Then her own voice came back through the speaker, a half-second later, slightly flattened, like a replay stripped of emotion. Need units to my location. Her hand froze on the radio. She released the button as if it burned. Felix heard it and went cold. It's still here. The partner swallowed hard. It's quieter, she said. That's not the same as gone. Everyone stood under the floodlights without knowing what to do with themselves now that the night wasn't actively squeezing them. That's the most dangerous phase. The moment after pressure releases. The moment you think you can sit down. The moment you think you can close your eyes for a second. The partner forced the group back into motion. Walk, she ordered. Pair up. Keep talking. Nobody sits. Nobody leans. We stay awake until daylight. Someone whispered, but it stopped. She snapped. It stopped because it got what it wanted. No one argued after that. They walked slow loops on the concrete, counting steps, telling dumb stories, forcing their brains to stay lit. Trent kept rubbing his palms like he could scrub off the grid texture. Aaron stared at the floodlight pole and then caught himself, gaze snapping down like he'd been trained by fear. Minutes crawled. The sky began to pale at the edges, first a faint gray smear, then a thin line of lighter blue behind distant buildings. As daylight approached, something else changed. The lot started to fill with normal sound, a truck on a nearby road, a distant door slamming, birds, tentative at first, then more confident, the world turning back on. And then, in that fragile, almost morning, every phone in the group buzzed at once. Not a ringtone, not a call, one synchronized vibration like a heartbeat. Felix didn't want to look. Dell didn't want to look. Trent looked anyway, like his reflexes were still being tested, his face drained of color. It sent a photo, he whispered. Felix's throat tightened. Don't describe it. Trent swallowed, eyes wide and wet. It's bright. The partner stepped closer, voice low. Delete it. Trent's thumb hovered. His breathing sped up. I can't. Felix grabbed Trent's wrist and forced the phone down, screen facing the concrete. The screen stayed lit anyway, bright white glow bleeding onto the ground. And in that glow, without anyone looking directly at the image, they all saw enough to understand the shape of it. A too bright interior, no shadows, and 4 human silhouettes standing in the middle distance like cutouts. Under the image, one caption. Do not sleep tonight. The partner closed her eyes for half a second, too long, and snapped them open with a gasp, terrified of what her own fatigue almost did. Then she looked at the paling sky and said the only thing that sounded like truth. We're not going home, she whispered. Not yet, because home meant beds. Beds meant the seam, and they all understood now. The abduction didn't start when Daniel vanished from a crowded house. It started the moment sleep became a door the night could open on command. Dawn didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a delay. The sky brightened, shadows softened, and the world started pretending again. Cars, birds, a jogger in the distance who had no idea a group of shaking people had been pacing an industrial lot all night to avoid closing their eyes. The officer's partner kept them moving anyway. She looked wrecked, but her voice stayed sharp. No beds, no couches, no sitting. If you feel yourself drifting, you say it out loud. If you think you're fine, you're the first one to drop. Nobody argued. They'd all learned the same lesson. Relief is where you get taken. They drove in pairs to a diner at the edge of town with huge windows and hard plastic chairs. The partner chose a booth directly under the brightest lights and made them sit upright, elbows on the table, hands visible. No heads on hands, no slouching, no resting your eyes. It would have looked ridiculous to anyone watching. That was the point. They ordered water and coffee they didn't want. They talked about nothing on purpose. The weather, the menu, the dumbest topics, because meaningful conversation made people soften, and softening was the seam. Hours passed. By late morning, the messages stopped. The vibrations stopped. The hum didn't return. The world stayed quiet in a way that made it tempting to believe it was over. That's when Dell finally asked the question everyone had been holding like a shard of glass. Did we just trade him? No one answered quickly, because if you answer too fast, you turn guilt into certainty. Trent stared at his hands and whispered, I didn't mean to. Felix's voice cracked. It used you. The partner didn't soften. It used all of us, she said. It used our exhaustion. It used our decency. It used the fact that we won't let someone die in front of us. The teen's friends sat rigid, eyes bloodshot, refusing to blink too long even in daylight. The homeowner kept checking the doorbell camera feed like it might undo the night. At 12:06 p.m., the first official update came in from dispatch. The partner listened to it on speaker with the phone on the table, volume low. A unit had located the teen on the highway shoulder. Alive, breathing, pulse normal, but unresponsive in a way paramedics couldn't explain. No head trauma, no overdose, no seizure, just a body that refused to wake. And then the dispatcher said the sentence that made every person at the diner go cold. He's saying a word. The partner's mouth went dry. What word? The dispatcher hesitated, then said it anyway. Awake. Dell's fingers dug into the table. That's what Daniel texted. The partner swallowed. Where is he now? Hospital, dispatch said. Under observation. The line went quiet. Trent whispered, so he came back. Felix stared at him. He didn't come back. His body did. The partner stood up, chair scraping. We are not going to the hospital, she said immediately. Dell's eyes flared. What? No intercoms, no ceilings, no drop tiles, no crowded waiting rooms, the partner snapped. Not after what we saw. Dell's voice broke. Then what do we do? The partner looked at the table, at the coffee, at the harsh diner lights, and you could see the truth land in her face like exhaustion finally winning. We do what the file says, she said. We stay awake until the next night passes. Felix swallowed. And Daniel, and the officer. The partner didn't answer at first because naming them felt like opening something. Finally, she said low and flat, they're not missing. Everyone looked at her. She continued, voice shaking at the edges. They're upstairs. Silence. Trent's eyes filled with tears. You can't say that. I can, she said, because it's true. And because pretending it's a normal missing person case is how this spreads. People will sleep. People will dismiss it. People will blink at the wrong time. She leaned on the table and looked at them, eyes red, jaw clenched. This started in a crowded house because it needed witnesses, she said. It needed proof without proof. It needed us to tell each other it was real. Dell whispered. Why? The partner's answer was quiet, brutal, and simple. Because sleep is the easiest door humans give away, she said. Every night, for free. They left the diner in pairs again. Bright daylight, open air, no ceiling. They walked until their legs ached because motion was safer than comfort. They called family members with lies because telling the truth would make it travel. They took turns watching each other's faces for eyelid drops like they were monitoring vital signs. That night, nobody went home. They rented 2 motel rooms with hard chairs and kept the lights on. They kept talking. They kept pacing. They kept forcing their bodies to stay on this side of the seam. At 3:12 a.m., all of their phones vibrated once, synchronized like a heartbeat. No message, no call, just a pulse to remind them it still knew where they were. Dell started to sob. Felix held her upright. The partner stared at the motel wall and whispered the final truth of the case, the one that makes this scarier than any abduction story you've heard before. It doesn't need an empty road, she said. It doesn't need a lonely cabin. It doesn't need one person isolated. It can take you from a crowded room. And it can wait for you every night in the same place you go willingly. Sleep. That's why the warning isn't dramatic. It's practical. Do not sleep. Because the moment you do, you're not just resting. You're opening the only door you can't lock from the inside.